Well, good afternoon or good morning, wherever you are in the world, and welcome to this webinar on internationalisation and climate change. My name is Celia Partridge and I'm Assistant Director, Partnerships and Strategic Insight at Universities UK International. This webinar is the latest in our series on enabling international strategies, and I'm sure we're going to have a really interesting discussion today. We chose this topic just by way of a background for a webinar because climate change obviously is the defining global challenge of our time, and also because the higher education sector is playing a leading role in both addressing these challenges and identifying and developing solutions. However, we are not unaware that the very nature of internationalisation can lead to challenges and tensions in itself. And I think there are a lot of questions that we can begin to ask ourselves about that. So, for example, how can we both contribute to the solutions yet minimise the damage we add to the environment while doing so? How should higher education institutions' international strategies adapt or be modified to take account of the immediate challenges we are facing and expect to face in the coming years? As a backdrop to our discussions today, we will be referencing two documents, amongst others, recently published that we wanted to highlight today. So first of all, at the end of March this year, Universities UK International published a report on a survey of UK higher education Pro-Vice-Chancellor International, so strategic leads for internationalisations across the higher education sector, on how the climate crisis affects internationalisation. And that report was also accompanied by 6 case studies of institutions responding in particular ways to that. The report covers both the interaction between internationalisation, international strategies, and sustainability strategies in a general sense, and thinking about how those two strategies within institutions are linked or otherwise. Also looks at the practical activities impacted by internationalisation and climate change. So how is international student recruitment being affected by the climate crisis, for example, and how is international research collaboration and transnational education being impacted, and what kinds of changes are we seeing within the implementation of institutions' international strategies because of the climate crisis? And the survey also, and the report of the survey also looks at how important institutions expect this to become in the coming years and thinks about trends going forwards. The second report that document that we're going to be referring to is the CANIE Accord, the Climate Action Network for International Educators, who in April published a CANIE Accord that has 3 principles and 5 themes within it that really directly relate to much of the conversation that we're having today. And I'm sure we'll touch on more of the detail of that accord as the conversation goes on. But to discuss these questions, and without further ado, I just wanted to introduce today's excellent 3 panellists that we've got for the conversation. First of all, Piet van Hove is EAIE's Vice President and Director of the International Relations Office at the University of Antwerp. He has been active in internationalisation since 1995, and today manages a large team dealing with the university-wide policy formation and execution in the area of internationalisation, including student and staff mobility, development cooperation, services for international staff and students, international education projects, and strategic networking. Piet has been very active in the leadership of several professional associations and non-profit organisations at national and international level for many years, including ACA and the EAIE, where he was elected Vice President in 2020. Secondly, Dorothea Antonio serves as NAFSA's Deputy Executive Director for Knowledge Development. She leads NAFSA's contribution to thought leadership in international education and provides executive oversight on internationalisation and global engagements, conference programming and publications. She joined NAFSA as professional staff member in 2010 and prior to that held various volunteer leadership positions within NAFSA. Previously as Senior Director of Internationalisation Services, she developed NAFSA's internationalisation portfolio, working in areas of comprehensive internationalisation, leadership, global partnerships, and strategic alignment. And last but very means not least, Robin Shields is a Professor of Education at the University of Bristol in the UK. His research focuses on the globalisation of education. He is particularly interested in applying new forms of data collection and analysis to study global trends and processes. And he publishes research across several substantive areas related to globalisation and education, including internationalisation, climate change and higher education, international aid to education, technology and education in conflict-affected contexts. He's also the co-editor of Comparative Education Review and has served on the executive committee of the British Association for International and Comparative Education. So in a moment, I'm going to ask each of our panelists to give us some opening thoughts on what this topic means to them in their work and what they think is a key priority for the higher education sector in this particular area. I'm going to ask each panelist to speak just for 2 or 3 minutes to set the scene from their perspective, and we'll quickly move on to have as much discussion as possible. I would encourage you today to use the Q&A and the chat function to introduce yourselves, to ask questions, to send through any thoughts that you have. And we'll try to address as many of those as we can throughout. And it does help us as well to kind of form our discussions and questions as we go, if you let us have those as they occur to you. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over first to Pete van Hove. Pete, over to you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Celia, and thank you, Universities UK, for the invitation. I'm very happy to participate this afternoon, at least in my time zone. It's interesting that in your opening remarks, you said that climate change is the defining main challenge of our times, which is, I actually agree with, but it's a bit ironic actually that we're just coming out of another little thing, the pandemic, that also seemed to be quite impactful. And of course, as we all know, these things are not separate in a way. The big crisis that fell upon us with the pandemic is actually also an occasion to reflect and to think about how we could do things differently, which actually, in my mind, it gives us a lot of opportunities to also implement changes that could be beneficial in terms of climate impact. So, of course, we all learned a lot during the pandemic. There are some people, I just read some comments just a few days ago from a colleague saying, okay, we now know that everything can be done online, so let's just stop traveling now. That's one extreme that we hear right now. I'm not in that camp. I think the pandemic has shown us that, in fact, that the work we have been doing for so many years in internationalizing higher education, in giving our students and our staff diverse perspectives, letting them learn about diversity in the world, diverse contexts that people live in, and diverse problems that people face. And in fact, that whole goal has become even much more important now when we're dealing with things like the pandemic, but also the climate crisis. The fact that by bringing these different perspectives to people, we can create more solidarity, more feeling of facing the crisis together. That's actually much more important than ever. And that's why I think this is a moment that we can and should use as a moment for really changing the paradigm and changing the narrative of what we do in internationalization, and taking mobility out of the center where it's been in practice. It's been there for a long time. Many people saw mobility as a synonym of internationalization, which a lot of us have been saying for so many years is not true. We've been working on strategies for internationalization at home for many years, 20 years, I think. Many people have been working on that, but now is the time when finally we can grab the attention of the whole sector and say, okay, we have solutions, we have strategies that don't rely exclusively on mobility. Let's really start taking them seriously. And that's the moment we have to grasp now, I think, in terms of what's going on in our sector and of international education. Secondly, of course, the organization I represent here, the EAIE, is a large association in our sector, which is most known for being a convener of large events such as our annual conference, which is of course also a bit of a controversial thing now. Is it still reasonable to bring so many people, fly so many people over to one location and talk about sustainability in that setting? But that's to me a very interesting point of discussion, and a point that we should be very mindful of. But I'm sure we'll come back to that a little bit later in today's webinar. So I would leave it at that for the moment. Thank you.
Thank you, Pete. And you've already raised some really interesting things that I'm already itching to come back to. But before we do that, I'm going to hand over to Dorothea Antonio. Dorothea, over to you for your opening thoughts.
Thank you so much, Celia, and it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for the invitation. Greetings to all of you from actually just outside of Washington, D.C. So I'll provide a different perspective, hopefully today, for you all who are based in Europe as well. As Celia mentioned, I represent NAFSA, and for those of you who may not know, we are another similar international education association, and we actually just finished our first in-person event just a couple of weeks ago, and this is the first one we've had since 2019. So some of my colleague Pete's comments are ones we're thinking very much about, related to the importance of presence and event attending and collaboration in person, contrasted with the challenges we face related to climate change and the importance of sustainability moving forward. Sustainability is something we all must embrace. Climate change is absolutely real, and I do feel that the field is definitely engaged in this. The pandemic really caused us an inflection point in terms of how the field was going to respond over the past 2 years. And I will say that I feel that they responded better than we could have ever expected in terms of pivoting, in terms of the reductions that many felt at higher education institutions, reductions in international education offices. And so today I hope to be able to provide some conversation about that, so to best help members and professionals and administrators moving ahead to work on sustainability, which is so critical, to continue to advocate for the field in which they believe, and ultimately to create and contribute to a greater global good. So I'm so excited to be here, and I look forward to having more conversations around the different questions, but maybe I'll leave it there for now, Celia.
Dorothea, thank you very much indeed, and agreed. I mean, I think this is an opportunity for a lot of collective action, and think about ways in which we can do that is really important. But before we get too much further into some of that, I'm going to hand over to Robin Shields for your opening thoughts.
Great, thanks, Celia, and thanks everyone for being here today. I'm speaking to you from a rare, warm, sunny day at the University of Bristol, and it's wonderful to see people from the UK and all around the world joining. So I come to this topic, I suppose, primarily, first of all, as a beneficiary of international education. I'm a researcher who's had his career prospects, the types of research he can do, the people he can work with, greatly enhanced through internationalization, through international study, and through international travel. And that's a wonderful thing that's greatly enriched my own career. I'm also able to work with bright, capable students from all around the world, and I think that's a wonderful thing. It's something I enjoy every day. So my views on internationalization are very positive, but I'm also somebody who's increasingly conscious that it's embedded in economic systems and social systems that are not sustainable. And so we need to start asking about what it's going to look like 10 years from now, 20 years from now. How can we change the social systems in which we're embedded, in which our universities and other educational institutions kind of depend upon? What are the forms of social action that we can take? And so that's something I've tried to do in my own research by looking at carbon emissions from international student travel around the world, which are actually very considerable when you think that up until the pandemic, there was about 5 million international students flying around the world every year. That's kind of like a large mobile city moving around the world. More recently, I've been involved with the Climate Action Network for International Education. And it's great to see two members of the CANIE board here, Eddie West and Elsa Lamont. And I've been involved in the launch of the CANIE Accord, including the Leaders Forum in the COP26 Week of Climate Action in November, and then in April in the launch of the CANIE Accord. So it's something I hope to speak more about. If you haven't heard of CANIE, you should look them up. It's a grassroots, volunteer-run organization of professionals in international education who want to take more action in climate change, and who want to coordinate action within the sector. So the CANIE Accord is a great way to do that. If you haven't checked it out yet, please do.
Robin, thank you very much indeed. And I think maybe we will probably touch on some of the the elements of the CANIE Accord, it has, I think there are something like 70 different actions that institutions are encouraged to work on or work towards, but actually as a signatory you only have to sign up to agree to do 5 of those from three different themes. So I think if nothing else, it's an excellent way of looking at things that you could be doing or things that you could aspire to be doing, and thinking about action plans to get you there. Also, I think we've had some interesting opening thoughts, and I suppose the first thing that really occurs to me is what we really understand by this when we talk about internationalization and the climate crisis, and how we articulate what the impact on that really is for our sector and for international strategies of institutions. Pete, you mentioned about mobility, and I think also about travel and conferences and so on. Is that really, I mean, I think I'm really being a bit provocative here, because I don't think this is going to be the answer to the question, but is this really just about travel? Is that the only way that we need to think about this topic? How do we start to articulate what else are the kind of buckets of activity that the sector really need to address beyond travel? Or is travel, if we solve the travel problem, is that it? Is there anything else we need to worry about? What would you say to that?
Well, I wouldn't call it the travel problem. I would call it travel is still a great opportunity, and we should now be much more mindful that it's actually a luxury, and that it's a unique thing we can use when it's really appropriate to use it, and when it brings us more benefits than it costs at that moment in a broad sense. So that's actually the very important reflection I think we should all be making all the time now, if we consider traveling for some purpose within our work, or have our students travel, is really the benefit, are we really using it in a way that's purposeful, and where the benefits that the travel will bring are actually important enough to warrant the travel. That's the very fundamental thing. But when you say internationalization of higher education, this in itself is, as I said in my opening remarks, it's more important than ever. I mean, the only way we will ever tackle global challenges like climate change is through collaborative action worldwide, and by having people collaborate. And collaboration is not something that's easy. It's something that students have to learn. It's something that we as professionals, academics, and institutions have to learn. And that's the fundamental thing we should be working on. And when we say that, when we want to have our researchers collaborate, when we want to have our students collaborate, we have to pick the tools that are most appropriate. And a lot of it will be online. A lot of collaboration can be done online and can be learned online. We can have our students do group assignments with colleagues from different countries around the world, mostly online. And that will really be hugely beneficial. And with that, we have to aim for 100% of students. All our students have to learn to do that, because it's also what they will need in later life to be a positive actor for change in whatever sector they end up in, and for society at large. So that's the fundamental thing. And then, as I said, take mobility out of the center, but still use it in a purposeful way. And when you use it, do it as greenly, is that a word, as possible, and be mindful of and that's where the literacy comes in. We have to spread literacy about these problems, and to make sure that people know what the different elements are at play, how they can be mindful and strategic and in choosing the right path. Yes, I would put competences in terms of knowledge, skills, and attitudes, very importantly, at the center in terms of teaching and learning. And in the way we organize that or we manage that, I would also put the purpose first, spreading understanding, knowledge about situations, contexts in different parts of the world, putting that first, and then choosing the right tool for the purpose, which can include mobility or face-to-face meetings. So that's the way I would look at it.
Yeah, I think that's interesting, and I think the collaboration comment in particular is something that I think we have to figure out how to work together and to what ends, and where do we put our efforts, what's going to have the most impact. I suppose that's one of the questions as well. But Robin, I just wonder from your perspective in terms of how we start to articulate what the challenges are and therefore where we need to put our energies. I suppose I still grapple with the challenge that it's not really 100% clear what we're trying to achieve within an international strategy. What changes do we need to make to our strategies? Do we have all the knowledge and the information at our fingertips to understand, for example, by how much we ought to be reducing our travel emissions, and how can we make those decisions? Do we actually have the information and the data that we need, or do you think there's more that we need on that score?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And the answer is we don't know right now what changes we need to make, that there's not necessarily a checklist of that you can put these things in your international strategy or your institutional strategy, and then you're okay, carry on. But this is a field where people are good, as Pete has said, at sitting down together, collaborating, solving problems and working together. And so that's what we need to do. We need to start the discussion going. And that's why it's great to see an event like we have today. To go back to your earlier question about whether or not it's just travel, I would say, even though I've researched this quite a bit, it's not just travel at all. In fact, if we all stopped traveling, that would be a drop in the ocean as far as climate change is concerned. So it is good to travel. There are benefits from travel. But what it does is it points us to the fact that we're connected to these unsustainable systems, that we're not kind of immune. It's part of our lives too. It's part of our work, and it's something that we need to engage with. The CANIE Accord is very useful in pointing to different forms of data that you can collect quite easily and that you can use to benchmark what you're doing year on year to improve over time and to work with others to support them. So there's no kind of commitment to stop doing anything that you need to do for your work. For example, it's not about stopping international mobility or anything like that, but just about getting climate change at the center of what we're doing, making sure that it's something that we think about in our day-to-day work.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. I mean, I think just to come back to the point about having the right data and understanding what you need to do in order to reach your institution's targets, our survey that we published in March showed that I think we asked whether in the UK international strategies were directly linked to or cross-referenced by the sustainability strategies of the same institution. And the answer was that about 38% said that they were, and 48% or 49% said that they weren't, but they were planning to. So I think that shows a huge shift in how international directors or pro-vice chancellors or senior international leads are beginning to think about their international strategy in the context of a much bigger picture and the impact that that's having. And I suppose the question is, as you have said, and as the CANIE Accord helpfully gives us lots of tools to help us start to think about that. But I think given that there are still at least half institutions who haven't directly done that yet, it does kind of point to perhaps a lack of understanding or a lack of data or a lack of maybe resource or the necessary intelligence that institutions would need in order to make those changes. I don't know, Dorothea, I mean, from the States, what's your perspective on that, and how you think that US institutions are articulating this challenge, or is it a topic that's really starting to be properly discussed now?
Well, I would start from the end of what you just asked me. It's absolutely being discussed now. However, in a very decentralized higher education system like we have here in the US, with no government directives, institutions are left to manage and govern themselves, albeit public institutions have their state and federal requirements. I would say, though, I mentioned our conference earlier, and the theme was building our sustainable future, which really did result in more content than ever before from people talking about what they are doing at their institutions related to sustainability. So while I'm not surprised at the results that you had from your recent survey, I do think we are at a momentous part that will continue to increase. And obviously institutions are huge beings in terms of things accomplished, right? So depending on where you sit at a university, whether you're able to embed sustainability into the work that you're doing, whether sustainability in and of itself is part of the mission of the university, those are not easy things to tackle. But one thing I do like at where we are right now is, and the CANIE Accord is a perfect example, is just encouraging people to start taking steps. So not to get overwhelmed of saying that my institution doesn't have a sustainability statement, therefore we are not doing anything. And I think that is a tension and a danger that we all face moving ahead. People are already overwhelmed, having just experienced what we've experienced the past couple of years, and to make them feel that, oh no, we're not doing anything, is a challenge. On the other hand, we want to recognize the emergency and the crisis that is climate change. So I do think I'm really encouraged in terms of the tools that are starting to be developed, the different approaches being shared. I'd say we've worked really hard on a couple different climate change and sustainability resources at NAFSA in the past year, and I'm happy to share that in the chat. But really being able to provide tools and opportunities for people to start learning what they may or may not do on their campuses, because this is all still very new for many, particularly in the international education field, and they're also challenged with the dilemma. I agree with my colleagues that travel is not the only thing we should be focused on, and quite frankly, it would do us a disservice if we only spoke about travel when we talk about climate change, because the field of international education, I think, really is at an important part in terms of the articulation of the value of it and the commitment of it to solving global problems, which we all know inherently, but we don't always do a good job at messaging it. And I think now more than ever, we really do have to articulate that, so then we can tackle different tactics in terms of contributing to a more eco-friendly environment, whether it's travel changes, whether they're structural changes, whether they're providing different intentionality in terms of your education abroad programming. There's so many different areas to go. I think we're at a really important point that we need to provide that information out there, and then help share best practice and different tips in terms of what might be working at one institution, so that others get a sense of where they might even start. So I know I went a lot of different ways with that question, Celia, but there's so many opportunities right now, I think, and I feel optimistic about our field being able to tackle it, quite frankly.
If I could just jump in there a second, if you don't mind. I see the same thing happening in our association, the EAIE. We've seen a huge surge in, for example, in our Barcelona conference, which is coming up in September. We have over 20 different sessions that are focusing on sustainability and climate action. We published a special issue of our member magazine on sustainability. And it's because the biggest change will, in my view, will not come from policy documents or from official statements, but it will come from people on the ground. That's what we represent as EAIE and as NAFSA does as well. I think it represents people, practitioners in the field of international education. We reach about 10,000 different professionals with our activities every year, all the different online and publications and so on. So it's by spreading awareness, changing the mindset, and giving access to tools that they can use in their daily work to make the changes that really will in the end make a difference. For example, just as one example, at our conference, of course, I don't know how many people we will have in Barcelona in September, but our last conference before the pandemic was about 6,000 people. What we decided now, just recently, to do is to have only vegetarian food. We offer lunch catering to all the participants included in the registration. This will be all vegetarian in Barcelona, and something like that actually does make a significant difference. It's something we can do and that people will appreciate, and that can spread as good practice, I think, throughout anyone who's organizing events, just as an example. So I think that's where we can really create a real change is by spreading awareness, spreading access to tools, how to, for example, use carbon offsets when you do travel, how to find alternatives. Train travel in Europe is not a simple thing to navigate. I noticed it myself. I just booked my train ticket to go from Belgium to Barcelona in September. It's not obvious. Just spreading, some awareness, some experiences will actually, I think, influence people in also checking it out and trying it, because it's not always obvious when you start from scratch.
Thanks, Pete. And I just noticed on that last point that you made about travelling to EAIE by train, Elsa Lamont from CANIE, who's joined us from Melbourne. It must be about midnight there. Thanks, Elsa. I see you've posted a link there to how to travel sustainably. And I suppose that comes on to my next question, really, which is about the tools and resources that people feel that they would need. And I mean, those of you in the audience, if you have any burning desire for particular bits of insight or tools or resources that would help you to make these decisions more easily, or to develop strategies and so on, do put them in the chat or make suggestions, because I'd be interested to know. I mean, you've mentioned a few tools and resources, but what do you think, what kinds of things do you think that the people in this field should be using, or what doesn't exist that ought to exist that we should be thinking about it? I don't know. Robin, do you have any kind of thoughts about that?
Yeah, I think most universities are very good at measuring their sustainability within the campus. We don't necessarily think about how we're tied to wider systems, to social systems and economic systems. So we can say that we're achieving net zero and we have green energy on campus, but we don't have a way to track what's called scope 3 emissions, or we don't consider these often. These are emissions like international travel or travel that students would undertake to come to us. So perhaps better forms of accounting. I think probably the innovations we need the most are not technological innovations, but social innovations. So new ways of collaborating together, new relationships, new discussions. And I think these are coming up. As Pete said, it's happening at EAIE. I'm sure it's probably happening at NAFSA too. I guess it's not a technology again, but I think we need leadership, particularly within institutions. We have a lot of support from societies. We have a lot of support from, I think, the profession of international education practitioners generally. We don't, in my experience, have great support within institutions where senior managers and middle managers' goals are often set according to KPIs that don't really take into account sustainability, or that tend to, and again, Celia, your survey results speak to this a little bit, they tend to separate sustainability as a separate scope of activity for the university or a separate field of activity. So we need some leadership where people across the institution are willing to say sustainability and climate change are part of my portfolio, no matter what I'm working on, whether it's human resources or internationalization or research. We need leadership that takes ownership for climate change and sustainability.
I think that leadership point is really important, and obviously did come out in our survey a little bit, the extent to which those two sort of strategies aren't linked. But it's also interesting that in the UK sector, there are a number of senior leaders in this field who have responsibility, oversight in their institution, both for sustainability and for internationalization. So you think it is interesting where those people are in those positions, that they actually do have to somehow try and make sense of both of those challenges, and the extent to which there is a tension or there is a conflict there in terms of carbon emissions and agreeing on new opportunities for international collaboration and so on. But I obviously take your point about new ways of collaborating and networking and so on. And there's certainly other ways we can do that. Because of COVID, we've kind of accelerated that process, I guess. I mean, I suppose, sorry, Dorothea, go ahead.
No, one thing, if I may too, I absolutely agree that leadership is essential. And it's the articulation of new types of leadership now that we need more than ever. I'd also say that it's really important for a field that prides itself on its inclusionary aspects. We need to make sure we are expansive in terms of the voices in these conversations, that we have perspectives from north, south, across the world related to sustainability, related to climate change, what they're doing in institutions, how collaboration can happen. We've learned a lot over the past couple of years, having to pivot and do a lot more virtually. I think it would be a shame and a mistake if we do not continue to consider the affordability of access that virtual have provided to a lot of different segments of the population, and moving forward, make sure we figure out how to include them and how their perspectives to lead us in other kinds of conversations related to best practices, best tools, tactics, measurements related to climate change.
Thanks, Dorothy. And I think that's an important point to raise. I mean, I'm conscious that the panelists here and all of us here are from the global north. We don't have any representatives from the global south. And I think that obviously the early and most major impacts of climate change are largely being felt in places that we're not living in right now. That will likely change over time, but I think we do have to kind of be cognizant of that. And I think perhaps, that's something that we also need to think about, is how do we engage other international partners in a meaningful way to really kind of meet them where they're at, and not where we're at so much, as kind of really understand everyone's perspectives on that. So I do agree with you. I mean, I think the question related to that is really about social justice as well, and that angle of this conversation. If we're talking about travel, and there will be institutions who are obviously looking to limit that or to minimise unnecessary travel, and rightly so, and maybe rethink about their travel policies. How do we ensure that we're actually enabling people who, I count myself as one of the lucky ones who came from a generation when I went to conferences all the time internationally and didn't think anything of it, and look at all the damage I've probably done as a result. But there were people nearer the beginning of their careers who won't have had those opportunities, versus very preeminent professors who will maybe create more impact if they're the ones to go, because of the networks and the connections that they might be able to make if we're thinking about international conferences. So how do we begin to explore the kind of social justice angle of equity when we're thinking about who benefits from what we do enable to happen in the future? Who would like to comment on that thorny issue?
I'm happy to jump in, because I think about this a lot. And I'd start by saying student travel, generally student mobility, is quite a good use of, if you want to use the term, environmental resources. Of all the people traveling around the world, I think they have kind of the strongest social justice entitlement to the emissions that they're creating when they travel. There's a lot of benefits that come from it. I think in a way, your question, Celia, kind of provided some of the answers, that we have to make sure that the way that we travel is progressive, that we provide opportunities to people who have not had opportunities before. I would say that people later in their career probably get less benefit from each additional trip that they undertake. Somebody whose early career will generally yield the most benefits in terms of what they'll gain from the opportunities. Similarly, students who have not had access to international travel before studying, perhaps, those are some of the strongest candidates for international travel, I guess, from a social justice perspective. I would say a lot of literature on internationalization points to the benefits of cultural immersion in a new country, in a new culture. And so probably short-term mobility is less beneficial in that respect. We might want to prioritize people who can make a commitment to spend a substantial part of their a semester, some amount of time really immersing themselves in a new culture, in a new country. So there's no absolute guidelines of when we can say somebody should travel and somebody shouldn't travel, but we can start to kind of identify intuitions we have, and then put some more specific parameters around those to see where we should prioritize travel.
Yeah, I think, Robin, what you just said, I also noticed often the calls to let's all stop traveling or come from people who've actually had the luxury of traveling quite a lot, and who may be tired of traveling. But it's just not fair, I think, in that respect. And again, it's much more about what you use the travel for, and actually that it's for a collaborative purpose. That's the most important thing, I think, because there is still I think what we do in international education, the fuel of collaboration is trust, in my mind. And what we try to do is build trust between students, between staff of different institutions, between institutions. And that's actually the basis for how we will tackle problems together in a collaborative way in the future. So that's the most deserving purpose, I think, for travel is to actually build that trust. And there is something about meeting face to face that has a unique effect in that respect. I still think that's true. So that should be the purpose, I think, when we do use travel. And I agree that when we think about what we're doing in international education, it's also about broadening. What I see happening now is broadening a little bit the scope. We used to talk a lot about international and intercultural competences as the thing we are striving for. What I see all around me is that actually it's a broader thing. We have to be building respect and let's say sensitivity to diversity of all kinds. And diversity can be found locally, but diversity is also found by bringing together people from different countries. And that's the thing, that's the critical factor for me, is making sure that we bring diversity into everything we do, not only in the inputs of what we do, but also in the effects that we're trying to have on society, that we make sure we incorporate diverse viewpoints and diverse needs and diverse contexts into everything we do. And that's linked to the trust that's needed to have fruitful collaborations. That's, I think, the thing we should be trying to focus on.
No, absolutely. Dorothy, I know you wanted to come in as well.
Sure. No, I was just going to also add to this the absolute importance of including students into these conversations, right? Climate change writ large, but definitely related to social justice, and let them guide us. We know more than ever when it comes to climate change, students are making choices about universities and attendance, depending on what people are doing. Let's include their voices more. What are they looking for? What would be meaningful travel for them? And I feel like as a field, that's a place where we can improve, right? And to start really listening, because they are the future. They're making decisions, and let's hear what would be valuable to them. I absolutely agree in terms of prioritization of travel, and I think many offices are starting to do that, particularly with more intentionality after the pandemic. And that's the way to go. But let's figure out a way to make sure we have students in these conversations as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And what we see is also grassroots initiatives from the students. We've been highlighting some of them, but our young generation of current students are very dedicated and very responsible in that respect. Many of them, most of them, I would say. So it's we have to also have trust in that generation and let them figure out, and it's exactly what they're doing now through many initiatives, is how to be able to have their learning experience, but be responsible in terms of climate at the same time.
I do remember hearing a story of a group of students at a university in the UK that had, I can't remember the subject that they were studying, but there was a certain field trip that was planned every year as part of the course to another country, and the students clubbed together and agreed that they didn't think it could be justified for climate reasons, and they went to their professors and said, we don't think this should go ahead, we don't think we can do it another way, and the professors listened to them and they figured out a way to deliver the same impact and the same learning through not traveling. And I think that's just a lovely story about how, by listening to students and thinking things through, you can actually come up with new ways of doing things that are less harmful to the planet. So yeah, absolutely agree. And I think it'd be good to hear of more stories like that to understand what more is actually possible as well. So, perhaps there is some way of kind of creating a bank of the kinds of stories that of things that are led by students, things that are led by staff, new initiatives and so on, to kind of inspire people, I suppose, to come up with new ways of doing things. It seems sort of obvious, but I think sometimes people think that if you've been running a course for a certain number of years, it's just baked in that that's what you do. And until someone points it out to you, maybe it hasn't occurred to you that you could actually do it a different way, and just takes that person or people to suggest something new and different. I'm going to come to, we have a question. I have a question from the audience, and it's something that is related to something I was kind of going to come to anyway, and I suppose it's really about what the future would look like. And the question is, would there still be a market for UK higher education institutions if international students did not travel to the UK? Would HEI brands still resonate via a dislocated mode of educational delivery? And I suppose this is linked to a question that I think, and a topic that I kind of wanted us to cover as well, in terms of is international student recruitment, this current model, really sustainable? Could we see a world in which that really changes? And is that entirely unthinkable? Or is there a world in which, when people talk about the challenges of climate change in other sectors, the word system change those words are mentioned all the time. System change is necessary, and this would be a huge system change. So I'm just wondering. We seem to have lost Pete temporarily. Hopefully he'll be able to reconnect. Just wondering whether, what do you think in answer to that question? Could we do without international student recruitment? How would it work, and how would it work for universities and their brands, not necessarily just to the UK, but in general? Dorothea, perhaps, do you want to have a think about that?
Yeah, I would say that's an excellent question, Celia, and one that we're going to have to tackle moving forward, certainly. And I'm not certain, is your question more to do with the actual recruitment or the actual movement of the student to a university upon being accepted? And both of those will be things that we need to tackle moving at. What's a meaningful experience for any student? We've based it so much on the physical aspect, and there are proven aspects of the physical presence being meaningful. What does that mean moving forward? I really look to the field to see the articulation of information, of best practices moving forward. I certainly know that the enrollment challenges of the past couple of years without being able to travel resulted in much more virtual recruitment than ever before. So universities and organizations pivoted already to being able to meet with students and prospective families across the world virtually. So that has already happened. I don't think there will be a switch back to now it only happens in person again. I don't think we're ever going to go backwards. But I think moving forward, if we provide enough conversation and information out there related to the urgency of climate change, I do think that we will come up with more creative solutions moving forward. That's a preliminary answer to you for now.
I mean, I guess I wonder if the question is also about, why do students need to travel in the first place? Cannot higher education students be given their courses where they are at without them having to go to bricks and mortar somewhere in another country? Is there a way that the institutions can innovate to deliver the education to students where they are and still have some form of experience which is likely going to be different but still very effective? And some institutions have got international campuses that mean that students from that region can travel without such great distances, and transnational education as well, working with international partners, local partners on the ground, and so on. Do you think that's really going to be? Do you think TNE, for example, is going to be one of the solutions to that? That sort of distributed learning in that way, where students are all dislocated from the home institution, if you like. I don't know, Robin. Do you have any thoughts on the value of TNE to that?
I think it's a good option, definitely. And you see that universities have already, as Mike points out in the comments, these models already exist. There are markets that don't require international students to travel to the UK. However, I think in response to Sam's question, it's also important to point out nobody has actually said international students should not travel to the UK. We're just saying that we should be more thoughtful about it, and that we shouldn't assume continual year-on-year growth, because that might not be possible if we extrapolate long-term into the future. I think in relation to what you've said, Celia, we do have ways definitely to deliver learning, I guess, to students around the world without them flying to the UK. As somebody who teaches international students on a very regular basis, I'm also always aware that that's only a small part of what they're getting from their international experience, that it's a lot about learning about living in a new culture, meeting other people from around the world, building networks. So that's part of where we have to kind of develop and innovate, is can we provide those same opportunities without the same levels of travel that we have today, or perhaps holding travel constant but not growing at the same rate that we have in the past. Could I jump in just a second? Building on what Robin just said, I think the real benefits of international education are from being immersed in
a different environment, and preferably a diverse environment and so for that reason, I think maybe the recruitment model that existed before the pandemic was not that sustainable to begin with in some cases, in some countries, and I'm not an expert in UK higher education system or how international education played out there, but as far as I know, there were some issues with that, with diversity in international programs. So I think, and having transnational education in the sense of bringing a campus to one country also would not necessarily bring a setting of much diversity to the students. So I would urge to think more creatively about that and try to build that experience for students to be immersed in a diverse environment in different ways. But again, I also agree with what Robin just said. I mean, travel for the purpose of long-term study in another country is not problematic in my mind. If it's just, limited to beginning, end of the studies or the academic year, then it's perfectly justifiable. I don't think there's a problem with that.
Yeah, and I think that perhaps just to kind of come back to a couple of points that related to that people have made is around collaboration and innovation, and this is maybe an area that I mean, the UK sector is highly competitive in terms of international branding and reputation and positioning and international footprints and so on. Yet we're also really good at working together. So to take the example of the invasion of Ukraine, and UK universities have really stepped forward to support and making twinning arrangements with Ukrainian universities, and when necessary, universities are really good at coming together to help address challenges. And so you think maybe, and universities have got footprints all over the world. I'm just talking from the perspective of the UK at the moment, but that's the case with many, many other nations as well. And so I wonder whether there's scope for greater collaboration between institutions in different countries to identify and how they can collectively support students without having to travel, at the same time giving them a really diverse and distinct educational experience wherever they are in the world, but that still makes them somehow feel like they're a member of that university. I think it's a huge challenge, but it feels like that might have to be part of the solution in the coming years. I think it's a good question, certainly. Thanks, Mike, for that. There's another question I just wanted to come to in the box at the moment that says, again, it's a UK-focused question from Sam. Is the UK higher education unique in the eyes of international students? Do the UK's physical assets provide this a uniqueness? I suppose this could be applied to other nations as well. What makes a particular nation unique in its sort of what it offers from its international sector? I think one of the main reasons that international students want to come to the UK is because of perceived quality of the education there, and that that's going to be the same or different. There'll be different reasons or the same reasons for students to go to other countries. So is there something there in terms of what pushes people to travel to certain countries? Do you think that can be addressed in a different way, and you address those needs through a different construct of education? I don't know who wants to kind of come to that question.
The one thing I would say certainly all different countries will have their unique appeals to different students for different reasons, and all valid. I would just urge it not to just be a travel conversation. So this isn't about whether they should travel to the UK or the US or wherever for education. It's where they have a valuable experience. And our job is to ensure that experience is rich and rewarding, and it's not just about the travel. The travel is the tool that got them there, but that they'll be immersive, that increasingly there are hybrid components to all education experiences. And I hope that will increase and continue in the future. So I don't think it would serve us well to make it only about that they shouldn't go to the UK for their experience. It's more about how it can be a rich and rewarding experience, and how they can learn more about sustainability, how they could be better contributors to the society, how they can contribute to local communities when they are in the UK or elsewhere. I think that's where we need to focus moving forward with the dialogue, because I think it's really important, the lasting local and global impact we know that this work does is something that we should celebrate moving forward.
Pete, sorry, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I just wanted to also confirm, and also what Robin said. I think the truth is usually one level deeper than you initially think, and the benefits really of an international experience in some form are usually not coming from the things that you would at first sight think. It's not always about the intrinsic quality of a program or the technical skills that you will learn through that program. That's usually not what it's all about, because in this day and age, I mean, information is everywhere to be found at any moment. It's more about the attitudes, the collaborative skills, the fact of being in the same boat, literally or figuratively, with a bunch of other students from different countries and solving problems together. That's the learning experience that will really lead to the deep impact and that will benefit the students and society later on. So does the UK have unique competitive advantages? Definitely. I mean, I don't think there's any reason to doubt that. Looking at it from continental European perspective, we've always been a little bit jealous of the appeal of the UK, also of course being the language is an important factor there, and the quality and the history of the institution is beyond dispute. So that's I think there's grounds for a lot of confidence in that respect. But at the same time, I would hope it would be in a spirit of openness and collaborative, having more joint programs with universities from around the world, including the Global South, on different topics that relate to the Sustainable Development Goals and so on. That's the future, I think, where we can really offer altogether something meaningful to international students.
No, absolutely. I'm conscious of time, and I think I just wanted to, before I'm just double checking, but I don't see any more questions at the moment. But I wonder then, if in closing, before we close this webinar, just to give our panelists the opportunity to sort of share one takeaway thought from the discussion we've had, or the point that's kind of resonated the most with them throughout the conversation. I think I'm going to start with Robin. What's your kind of takeaway from today's discussion?
Well, I've heard a lot about collaboration and solidarity, I think, from all our speakers, and the idea that in this field, people tend to work together and they tend to solve problems together. And so that's something we need to do on climate change. Again, I'll end with the CANIE Accord. This is UUKi is a member organization, I believe, of UK universities, and we do not yet have a UK university that's signed up to the CANIE Accord. So I'll end with a challenge to people representing UK universities here today to be the first, perhaps, to sign the CANIE Accord.
Thanks very much, Robin. Just to note that there is a comment from Tom Windle in the Q&A section around research councils, and having a key role and benefits towards sustainability can come from those interactions. But equity in terms of North-South collaboration should be a focus in how research is funded. And I think we haven't really had time to kind of delve into international research funding and so on today. Maybe that's a topic for a future discussion. But yeah, I mean, very, very good point taken. Thank you, Tom. Just Pete, perhaps your final thoughts today.
As a final thought, I would mention something that I didn't mention before, but which is that the organization I represent, the European Association for International Education, actually did sign the CANIE Accord. We are very proud of that, and we were able, and I would urge everyone to really look into it, because you can choose your level of, your kind of starting level and your ambition level within the different aspects that are mentioned in the Accord. So there's a level for everyone to start at, and to have ambition that suits you, but it will bring meaningful and inspirational ideas of how you can advance and be more mindful of climate action in your context. So I would urge everyone to really look into it and seriously consider signing it.
Thanks. So 2 very definite plugs for the CANIE Accord so far. Dorothea, what's your final thought from today?
Certainly, and thank you, Celia, and everyone for this panel. I'd say the good news is that there's so much more discourse than ever before in the international education community and higher education writ large on climate change. The challenge is that the crisis is here to stay. It's not going away, and that we have to make sure our attention to this is permanent. So my takeaway today, and for hopefully for others, is that you have to start somewhere. Take some steps somewhere, and that we will be developing more tools and resources as a community to provide that, but welcoming more stories from the field in terms of what works and not, so that we can tackle this together.
Dorothea, thank you very much. Well, that's the end of our webinar today. I really enjoyed this excellent discussion. Many thanks to our three panelists, to Pete Van Hove, to Dorothea and Antonio, and to Robin Shields. Also, a special thank you to my colleague Donna Tabe at UUKi for her excellent organisation of the webinar today, and to all of you in the audience for joining us. I do wish you a very good afternoon or evening wherever you are in the world. Thank you very much for joining us today. Bye-bye.